Very good morning. Today we'll be talking about the intertidal ecology, more deep into the diversity as well as the adaptation to the recent climate change conditions. Here you can see the background image, which is taken in the Lakshadweep intertidal area. It's a sandy beach where you can see the low tide mark, cursor moving, and then here on the land side you can see the high tide mark. So today we are going to talk about the intertidal area, which is between the high tide mark as well as the low tide mark. So the area between looks like so small, right? But it has like more, more magic and then more diversity. And then this area is very important, and we will see one by one. So before that, everyone have visited the beach at least once in a lifetime, right? And I'm pretty sure that after this talk, you will have a different perspective of how the beach looks like. So coming to the topic, in the picture you can see on the seaward side you have the low tide mark, on the land side you have the high tide mark, right? So in between area is called the intertidal. So this is the area where the land meets the sea. And these areas are transitional coastal regions. Why transition? In the sense it will be constantly changing, and then who are the influences is basically the tides and waves that are mainly influencing these regions. So if you are frequently visiting to the beach, it could be Kovalam or Chennai Marina Beach or Besant Nagar or Mahabalipuram or Pondicherry, you can always see that the topography of the beach is always changing. And why? Because the tides and the waves are highly influencing these regions. So whenever the water move towards the sea, and then it will be like a low tide mark because the area is exposed to the atmosphere or to the sun. So whenever the water is submerged in these areas, then it's called as a high tide mark, right? And then the organisms that are thriving in these regions has to undergo a daily variation in temperature and the light intensity and the availability of seawater. So because this makes the organism life as difficult part. So the form and the shape of a shoreline as well as the degree of exposure always determine that what species has to live in these areas. So if you look at the typical definition, it's intertidal, it's nothing but the area between high tide and low tide. Ecology is nothing but the study of interaction that determine the distribution as well as the abundance of organisms. So the interactions could be between or among the organisms or between the organisms and the environment. Why we have to study this intertidal area? Because it's a best understood environment, right? It's easily accessible. If you are in Pondicherry, you will just take only few minutes by walk, even by walk or by bicycle or by car, you can just reach the beach in few minutes, right? So you don't need to really get wet in order to study these environment. And then whatever the research methodology or protocols that are executed in the terrestrial environment can be easily implemented in these intertidal areas during the low tides. And these areas are mostly dominated by the sessile organisms. However, when, as I said, in the high tide mark, the area is completely submerged with seawater, right? So during that time, it's poorly understood because we really don't know what is happening when the water is completely covered the intertidal areas. So before we go on to the topic, I will just touch upon, I said that the waves and tides are highly influencing the organisms in these areas, right? So we will first see what are waves. So waves are nothing but the moving energy. So the waves are usually happen with a disturbance. So if you kind of imagine, like if you are throwing a small rock into the quiet pond or even in a small bucket of water, it will cause a disturbance, right? And then there will be a formation of small ripples. So this is nothing but the same thing when it is happening in the oceans. So wind is the main cause of disturbance. So and that causes the ocean waves. So there are three factors that are mainly influencing the formation of ocean waves. So one is the wind speed. So the wind speed should always be more because it has to drag a lot of water, right, in the ocean. So the wind speed should be more in order to drag the water from the surface. And there is a fetch area. So second, there is a fetch area where the seawater and the atmospheric air interacts. So this area is called the fetch area. So here you have to see that how much area the wind is interacting with the water column. And the last is the wind duration. So how long the duration of the wind is. So all these three factors are mainly influencing the formation of waves. So if you look at the tides, tides and waves are always different, right? So tides are nothing but the periodic rising and lowering of the sea level. So these tides are always move towards the coast, right? And it's basically nothing but a very long process, and then these are like shallow waves that wrap around the earth. So since I said the waves are caused by disturbance, here the tides are also caused by a disturbance. So what it could be, basically the gravitational interactions between Earth, Sun and the Moon, right? Because I said it's a shallow wave that wrap around the Earth, and then Earth is continuously rotating, right? And then it's interacting with the Sun and the Moon. So as the tide rise and fall, it will create flood and the ebb currents. So you can see the animation below. Whenever the water is moving towards the high tide mark, right? On the yellow part, you can see the high tide mark, or towards the land side. So the type of current it causes are called the flood currents. And if the water is receding back or it's going towards the low tide mark, and these currents are called the ebb currents. And we are going to discuss about whatever the organisms that are thriving in these high tide mark as well as the low tide mark. So if you look at the frequency of the tides, so previously we have seen the flood and ebb current, right? So the water is rising as well as lowering. So how much time it takes? So the frequency is more important because whenever the earth is rotating, there will be always two high tides and then two low tides. So there is like a tidal bulge will happen. So whenever it's going towards the high tide, we call it as a bulge. So there will be two high tides and then two low tides will happen every lunar day. So the coastal areas that experience these are, it takes 24 hours and 50 minutes. So if I keep the cursor here at the moon interface, you can see that the moon is slightly moving towards the path because Earth is rotating. It takes 24 hours, and then if the moon is rotating from the path, it takes like 24 hours and 15 minutes to complete two high tides and two low tides. So for example, for instance, if today the high tide is happening at 12 o'clock, right? And then you calculate 24 hours 15 minutes, and then next day, tomorrow, the high tide will start at 12 hours, 24 hours and 15 minutes, because the moon has slightly moved from its path, and then the tidal influence is also moving towards the moon. So each tide will take 6 hours and 12.5 minutes for the water to move from high tide to low tide. So if you look at another animation from the NASA group, so it clearly shows, you can see the below image. So wherever the moon is circulating towards rotating around the earth, you can see the tidal bulges are happening, right? And the moon, the gravitation from the moon is more influencing compared to the sun related to the tidal bulge. So moving to the biodiversity of the intertidal area, it's very rich and then diverse. There are three categories. One is the mobile species, which can able to move from one place to another. So we have crabs, limpets, gastropods, and sea stars. And then we have sessile animals that are barnacles, mussels, and oysters. So these are all mostly like shelled organisms. And then lastly, we have plants, which is mainly composed of seaweeds. You can see this image, there will be fishes, there are birds that can feed on the intertidal organisms, and you have sea anemones, crabs. There are also corals that are available in the intertidal, and there are sea cucumbers and the starfishes. If you look at the animal community assemblages, there are again three types. One is epifauna. So these are animals that are dwelling on the surface of the sediment. And there are infauna, that animals dwelling below the surface of the sediment. And there are symbiotic animals which mainly dwells on another plant or animals. Whether this symbiosis could be of mutualism, where one can benefit from each other, or it could be parasitism, where only the host can get the benefit from the habitat organism. And also based on the size, there will be a three classification. One is meiofauna, macrofauna, and the microfaunas. So moving to the food chain, so like terrestrial and the ocean food chain, we also have food chain in the intertidal areas. And these food chains are really complex compared to the terrestrial as well as the marine counterpart. So why it is intertidal? Similar to a normal food chain, we have producers and we have consumers, right, in between, and we also have a top predators as well as the detritus or decomposers. But yeah. So compared to the marine and terrestrial food part, the food chain is really complex because you do have a producers, but there are only certain amount group of organisms that are mainly depends on these producers. And all the remaining organisms that are mainly detritus on the detritus. So these are nothing but the organisms could be scavengers or filter feeders, and depends upon whatever the waste that are coming out from the tides or brought into the intertidal areas by the waves, right? And then there is a last carnivores, where it mainly feeds on these grazers, scavengers, and the filter feeders. And this is also, these carnivores are nothing but the starfish that are mainly considered as a keystone species that we will look into at the end of the presentation.